I have constructed a chair out of swords. This is not allegory, symbolism, metaphor, or one of those regrettable moments in prophetic literature where a thing is described as another thing because the writer had access to a quill imbued with the spirit of Shakespeare. It is a chair, a literal chair, but it so happens to be made of swords. Don't knock it until you try. Anyway, I am sitting in it now, or rather attempting to sit in it with the sort of grim personal dignity normally reserved for monarchs, martyrs, and people trying not to yelp in front of subordinates. Around me are blades from 3 continents, 5 pantheons, 2 epics no one reads correctly anymore, and 1 extremely moody Persian saber that still believes it should belong to a poet. The overall effect is majestic in the way thunderstorms are majestic. Beautiful from a distance, expensive up close, and poorly suited to human resources. And still, despite the scale of my commitment, despite the labor, the curation, the theft, the diplomacy, the several small but legally interesting acts of acquisition, none of them are solving the problem. The problem is a cosmic itch, not a common itch, not one of those passing mortal irritations you can dispatch with a doorway, a wall corner, or the edge of a civilized piece of furniture. No, this one has lodged itself in the exact center of my back, in that narrow, inaccessible strip of spine, apparently invented by the universe during a phase of malicious craftsmanship. It is not near the shoulder where a competent tentacle could intervene. It is not low enough to be bullied into submission against a chair back. It occupies that tiny inland province of flesh whose sole political identity is contempt. I have leaned against stone pillars, carved door frames, the Grand Canyon, Olympus, a dying star, a very confused set of Chesterford's teeth, and in a moment I would rather not discuss the twisted horns of Satan while he was in a business meeting. Anyway, the itch remains. It has not diminished. It has not reconsidered itself. Because here is the thing no one tells you. Please pay attention to this, because I will not repeat myself. Every magical sword of divine consequence contains a hidden backscratcher. Yes, I know. Pause, if you must. Collect yourself. Walk around the room. Drink water. Stare out a window and reflect on what history has concealed from you. Then return and accept the fact that every sword worthy of song was forged with at least some accommodation for the ordinary bodily misery of the fool expected to wield it. This is not silliness. This is by design. If you are crafting a weapon for a chosen king, a sun-born hero, a prophecy addict, or one of those broad-shouldered Scandinavian enthusiasts who mistake frostbite for virtue, then sooner or later that person will develop an itch somewhere inaccessible while still expected to perform destiny. The true mark of divine workmanship lies not merely in balance, edge, or symbolic radiance, but in whether the hilt can be turned, slid, unfolded, or clicked into a tool useful at precisely the moment dignity has begun to slip. Most mythographers, and an alarming number of creative writing professors, omit this entirely. They adore the hero in principle, but refuse to acknowledge that a hero is, at all times, a creature with a spine, a bladder, and a set of deeply inconvenient physical needs. So they preserve the legend and discard the body, as though dignity could be maintained through selective editing. I take a particular satisfaction in correcting this. The hero's journey, contrary to several syllabi and at least one tenure committee, is not sustained by symbolism alone. It is held together by small, unglamorous truths, such as the urgent necessity of a proper backscratcher and the quiet tyranny of biological timing. They will describe, in exhausting detail, the flames on a blade, the lineage of the ore, the tears of a goddess caught in its fuller, the bloodline of the horse that carried it to battle, and the mood of the moon during its unveiling. But the one practical line that might have improved civilization forever. The sentence saying also included a concealed spinal relief implement of astonishing quality, somehow never makes it to the manuscript. This is why libraries exist. Well, mine in particular, in order to preserve the things posterity is too vain to admit mattered. By now, however, you may be wondering, Great Cthulhu, how did this discovery even begin? What is this paradigm-shifting thing about sword having backscratchers installed in them? It all started with me coming to the end of my journey carrying every single mythical sword into Vistarchi's forge. By the time I reached it, I was carrying enough legendary weaponry to trigger 3 prophecies and at least 1 territorial dispute. The swords knocked together in my arms, with the irritable clamor of famous men forced into proximity. A Persian saber kept slipping against my elbow. Something Carolingian and offensively jeweled was pressing into my ribs. Graham dragged along the floor behind me, like it expected applause for enduring hardship. Vistarchi did not turn at first. She was bent over the forge with one hand braced against the work table, the other steady on a set of tongs, her entire posture communicating the sacred dignity of being busy in a family otherwise governed by interruption. Heat rolled through the chamber in waves. Gold-flecked strands of her tentacle hair shifted in the forge light like living calligraphy. Then one of the swords slipped free from my grip, struck the floor, and announced my arrival with the metallic confidence of a mistake committing to itself. She glanced over her shoulder. Then she looked back at the forge. Then, with the patience of an eldritch woman verifying whether reality had once again become unserious on purpose, she turned fully and looked at me standing there with an armful of mythological nonsense.
I'm not interested in any side quests, Cthulhu. No.
She emphatically stated, I have not asked for anything, yet.
Firstly, you brought me every bad coping mechanism in heroic literature bundled like flowers. I am protecting my afternoon from whatever this is about. And second, I know the shape of a demand by the sound it makes when it walks. Yours is not unfamiliar.
Vistarchi, look, I just want you to make me a throne of swords. Nothing majorly involved. She threw up both hands.
Yes, of course. That's how everyone begins around here. First, it's Vistarchi, make me a throne of swords.
It really is only a throne of swords this time.
And then,
she continued, staring straight into my soul.
Somehow, through a miracle of paternal self-exemption, that becomes, Vistarchi, halt your existing work. Surrender your business days, rearrange the forge around my discomfort, and grant me preferential treatment as though the rest of creation were a clerical error.
I did not say clerical error.
You implied it with the bouquet of swords in your hands.
My tone was measured, and these swords are, well, they're actually kind of important. I probably should return them eventually. The swords rustled in agreement, one of them even vibrating the words, "It was your tone with the blacksmith when you walked into the air." No, Durandal, it is not my tone.
Actually, the sword is right. It is your tone,
she said, unrelenting, leveling a look at me.
the tone of a being already spending time he had not yet been granted. Give someone an inch and they take a mile. Give you an inch, and by sundown I am apparently indemnifying the mile, furnishing it, and engraving your name on it.
I am not asking for engraving.
No, because you assume engraving.
I drew myself up with wounded dignity. I feel that assumption is unfair.
And I feel,
she replied, folding her arms,
that experience has made me efficient. So no, I do not begin with inches anymore. I take the mile first. It saves everyone time, chiefly mine.
Miss Darky, just one throne of swords, please. It's not a Game of Thrones reenactment, I swear.
Get out of my forge with that nonsense.
This is of grave importance.
Out.
Wait, hear me out just this once. I am on a mission for my own health. She let out a breath through her nose and set the tongs aside.
Is this because you watched Game of Thrones again? Because I told you that show is not a lifestyle.
It is not because I watched Game of Thrones again. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked the pile over with increasing disbelief.
That sounded exactly like something said by a man who has absolutely watched Game of Thrones again.
I have watched many things again. That is not evidence.
It is in this place.
I shifted the swords, trying to recover some vestige of authority. One of them slid against another with the dreadful little scrape of famous objects developing opinions.
Well,
she relented a bit with that millennial mom sort of energy I've grown to know of her.
Don't we all require a throne anyway? What is this actually about?
I held her gaze for a moment. Then, with the weariness of an immortal finally cornered by the truth, said, "Cosmic itching." That changed her face just enough to move the whole moment out of mockery and into recognition.
Oh, the center back.
I narrowed my eyes. Yes, annoyingly so. She winced in immediate sympathy.
Ugh, yeah, no, that's evil. Mortals will never understand us. Why didn't you just say that instead of arriving like a divorced prophecy?
I did not arrive like a divorced prophecy.
You arrived carrying enough symbolic steel to ruin everybody's afternoon. It had a very specific energy.
I am in pain.
I know, I can see that. I'm saying the presentation was confusing.
Then she paused, frowned, and looked up at me properly.
Wait, where's Excalibur?
I shifted the swords against my chest. Why would Excalibur be relevant? That earned me a stare so profoundly maternal in its disappointment that I nearly apologized on instinct.
Oh, you really came all the way in here suffering and did not know.
She took the nearest sword by the pommel, moved it 2 inches to the left so the rest of them stopped pressing together like badly supervised cousins, and sighed.
Excalibur had the best back-scratching mechanism ever built into a mythic weapon. Quarter-turn release under the grip, Hephaestus design, Lady of the Lake commission, very tasteful, great reach.
She stared at me for a long moment, then picked up her tools with exquisite care and wiped her hands on her apron as though preparing to handle a contaminated thought.
Anyways, no side quest for me. Do with that info what you will. Run along now. This whole thing is starting to make me itch too.
With Vistarki's reluctant workmanship secured and my dignity already fraying at the edges, there remained only one sensible course. I would have to find the Lady of the Lake. This irritated me on principle. Any problem requiring a pilgrimage to Arthurian lands was already suffering from poor design, and yet the evidence before me was increasingly unavoidable. And then there was the matter of Excalibur itself. Excalibur. I was beside myself in thought with increased itchiness. Of course it is Excalibur. It is always Excalibur when something has been done properly, and then embalmed under 6 centuries of patriotic nonsense. Excalibur is the one artifact Britain has ever produced that was both over-symbolized and under-documented. Everyone remembers the stone. Everyone remembers the lake. Everyone remembers destiny, kingship, betrayal, tragic weather, and men in armor developing personal brands. No one remembers the specifications. No one remembers that the Lady of the Lake, who had more sense than most of the Arthurian crowd combined, commissioned the blade with practical features because she knew an absolute truth about rulership. A king may endure prophecy, war, adultery, and plague. But if he cannot reach the center of his own back in a damp climate, he will become unbearable by harvest. She took the design to Hephaestus. I know this because I went to the lake and asked her myself, which was already more effort than the poets ever made. They saw one damp woman rise from ceremonial water holding a sword, and immediately concluded she had forged it personally, as though aquatic presentation and industrial metallurgy were naturally the same profession. This the sort of reasoning that produces epics and collapses bridge maintenance. I arrived at the lake in a state of private collapse and public irritation, prepared for mist, symbolism, perhaps a hand emerging with some luminous nonsense about destiny. Instead, the water rippled once, and her voice came up from somewhere beneath the surface.
I shall not be re-emerging,
She stated, as if negotiating serious business from beneath the water, voice carrying upward with the composure of someone who had refused many things, and intended to refuse this one as well.
You have arrived beyond the hours in which I am inclined to be seen, my business hours to be more precise.
I stopped at the lip of the shore and bent toward the rippling surface, attempting to locate the exact point at which authority was refusing me. You have not even heard me yet. I paused there as if the sentence might defend itself if given a moment. If anything, you may have heard my approach first, which I would argue contains useful context.
I know the shape of a demand by the sound it makes when it walks,
She replied.
Yours is not unfamiliar. Also, I have a ghost itch.
There was a lingering pause, mostly because I had just heard that same phrase. A what?
A ghost itch.
She repeated, as though the phrase had long since lost the dignity of being questioned. A pale hand rose briefly above the surface, only to let a small fish pass cleanly through the wrist before she continued, unbothered.
It returneth without fail to the very place it held at the hour of my death, precisely, faithfully, with a loyalty I do not recall inviting.
A stone, dislodged from somewhere above, slipped through the faint outline of her shoulder and vanished into the water with a soft plunk.
I have been dead.
She went on, the cadence settling into something almost ceremonial before drifting again.
For a great many centuries, and yet sensation persists in addressing me as though I had not withdrawn from the arrangement. I find this unreasonable. If one is to perish, one expects at least a reduction in administrative burden.
I considered this. That is, I said carefully, the most coherent complaint I have heard in this entire mythos.
It is also inconvenient,
She continued, unmoved.
Were Excalibur presently in my possession, this matter would already be resolved. As it is, I am left with a ghost itch and no approved instrument with which to address it.
She shifted beneath the surface, the water drawing a faint, irritated circle around her.
And so,
She continued, with the calm of someone announcing a regulation rather than a feeling.
Until such time as the sword is recovered, I will be adhering strictly to hours of operation, no exceptions, no extensions, no overtime granted for the comfort of visiting entities, however eldritch.
I sat down and splashed the water where her reflection was gathering. This, I said at last, is the first useful thing anyone in Arthurian myth has ever told me. What happened to it? The water made a sound halfway between a sigh and a threat. She slapped water back at my face.
What do you want?
Well, Excalibur,
No, I'm outside business hours.
I do not want your hours of operation. I want the chain of custody. If the sword is no longer in your possession, then kindly indicate which century, monarch drowning, theft, prophecy, or clerical mishap last had custody of the only useful object in Britain.
Cthulhu, I need you to use your nigh omnipotence for a moment and think about this rationally. The sword, under cosmic law, will not work outside of business hours either. And what do you even need it for? If you are here, then something has gone terribly wrong.
An itch,
Ah,
she said, and at once there was softness in her voice, the sort born only of shared suffering.
the center back. Yes, it is always worse for your eldritch sort. Too many limbs, none of them where they are of any earthly use.
Yes. A silence followed then, though not an empty one. It had the full and settled quality of feminine vindication, as though she had been waiting centuries for a male cosmic entity to arrive at the obvious through pain.
I see.
She said at last.
That precisely is why I commissioned the modifications with Hephaestus. Though naturally, no one remembers that part. They remember the mist, the lake, the arm, the spectacle. No one remembers the woman who improved the design.
I stared at the water. Then I stared harder. Commissioned, I repeated, because history had just shifted sideways in my head with enough force to require repetition, not forged. Vistaki did in fact make this point to me, I said as an aside to myself, irritation of a theory blossoming into evidence. I am now in the regrettable position of experiencing it as reality.
Of course not forged.
She replied.
Do I look like a blacksmith?
Before I could answer, a pale hand emerged from the water and turned delicately at the wrist in presentation.
And even if I were inclined to attempt metallurgical labor from the bottom of a lake, how precisely would I manage it with these?
Her nails caught the light in a way that suggested both expense and sorcery. They looked like miniature aquariums, each one a tiny sealed kingdom of blue depths, silver glints, and trapped iridescence, as though several tide pools had been persuaded to hold still for cosmetic purposes. I confess, listener, that I was quiet for a moment. They are, I said carefully, because accuracy matters, astonishing.
I know.
They look like your manicurist was either a sea witch or the last competent artisan in Britain. Again she turned her hand, slower this time, letting the little submerged worlds in the lacquer catch the light. It was both an ode to vanity as much as its evidence permitted.
I had them done in Avalon.
That explains it.
It does. And if you like, I could arrange something for you later. A deep-sea shell finish, perhaps. Something with pearl. Your hands are long enough to carry ornament.
I snapped back to myself at once, morally and conversationally. Now I do think that for one terrible instant I nearly saw it. Not the Polish itself, you understand. I am not so far gone that I began picturing myself reclining with lacquered claws like some eldritch dowager of the abyss. But I did, very briefly, and to my everlasting irritation glimpsed the underlying logic. The color would have worked. A dark nacre, perhaps. Something abyssal. something that caught the light only when it wished to be noticed. There are vanities one can survive privately. There are others that arrive so fully formed they must be strangled at once. So I gathered what remained of my dignity, which by then could have fit in a thimble, and glared into the water. Madam, I began with all the solemn restraint of a being stepping away from a ledge no one else had seen. You will cease this campaign at once. I did not come to the lake in a state of spinal desperation merely to be lured, inch by inch, into whatever damp and glittering annex of femininity you have made for yourself beneath the surface. I am here because history has failed me. My back has betrayed me, and your sword, through no fault of my own, has become central to my survival. You will not derail this inquiry with pearls. She regarded me for a moment with the expression of a woman who had already decided I was being ridiculous, but had not yet chosen the most elegant way to say so.
My dear abyssal nuisance,
She replied, and her voice had that old Arthurian shape to it. Formal at the edges, but delighted somewhere in the middle.
if thy resolve may be so nearly overturned by a mention of tasteful adornment, the fault lies not in me, but in the frailty of thine own inward governance. I did but make an offer, a gracious one, I might add. There is no snare in refinement unless one was already half-minded to enter it.
I was not half-minded.
Nay?
No,
Not even a quarter?
I said nothing. She tilted her hand again, and the nails caught the light with such offensive composure that I immediately understood how dynasties collapse.
I see.
She said in mock defeat.
Then I have misjudged the matter. It was not temptation, it was vision.
Ghost witch?
And yet thou didst compliment them.
That was a matter of scholarship.
It was admiration, and you could have had such pretty eldritch nails.
At this, I leaned closer to the shore, one hand pressed into the moss, the other raised with the weary authority of someone trying to suppress both a distraction and a confession. Listen to me very carefully. I am already suffering under 3 separate indignities. First, the itch itself, which has now surpassed the rank of sensation and entered governance. Second, the revelation that Arthurian myth has been curated by men so terminally impressed by lakes and swords that they never once thought to preserve the practical schematics. And third, the fact that you, instead of helping me in a direct and orderly fashion, have chosen this moment to inform me that I possess decorative potential. I reject this. I reject the timing. I reject the premise. And I especially reject the possibility the pearl might, under different conditions, suit me. She smiled then, not broadly, but with the slow satisfaction of someone watching a very large creature wander into its own reflection and become argumentative.
As you wish.
She said.
I shall trouble thee no further on the matter. Yet if ever the day should come when thou art weary of severity and desirest hands that speak of depth, composure, and selective violence, thou hast but to return.
That sentence alone should have been forbidden by the church.
Most useful things are,
she said with quiet satisfaction.
And now you begin to understand Arthurian literature.
The surface of the lake settled after that, as though pleased with the remark. I, on the other hand, was not. I crossed my arms, not because it solved anything, but because it felt like the correct posture for someone attempting to drag a conversation back toward reason. Speaking of Arthurian literature, I have a question, I began, gesturing vaguely at the entire body of water, and by extension 6 centuries of literary negligence. How does history remember you as the originator of the sword? That has been your entire thing since humanity discovered it could write down incorrect conclusions with confidence. There was a shift beneath the surface. Then slowly she rose, just enough for 2 eyes and a deeply offended forehead to breach the waterline, like a thought reconsidering its tone.
The poets,
She said, each word placed with deliberate care.
did not listen.
A small fish passed directly through her temple as she spoke, emerging on the other side with no apparent enlightenment. No, I said, with the weary familiarity of one who has also been misquoted by existence itself. They never do.
I told them,
She continued, the water trembling faintly with the pressure of being correct.
very clearly and more than once, that I brought the design to Hephaestus. I spoke it plainly. I did not obscure the matter. I did not cloak it in metaphor. I even repeated myself, which I dislike.
I crouched at the edge of the shore, one hand braced against a damp stone, my itch momentarily forgotten, not from relief, but from the far more potent distraction of historical incompetence. And were you, I asked, with what I maintain was a reasonable commitment to accuracy, underwater when you told them this? She froze just enough that the lake around her seemed to hesitate in sympathy. Then she lifted a hand and made a dismissive motion through the air, scattering droplets like punctuation marks no one had agreed to read.
Semantics.
She said sharply.
I will not have my testimony reduced by the acoustical limitations of surface dwellers.
Humans, I said, because someone had to say it, cannot hear you underwater.
They heard enough.
They heard lake, I said, counting on my fingers now, because the situation had degraded to enumeration. And sword and destiny, and then immediately lost interest in everything resembling detail. That is not listening. That is decorative comprehension. She sank slightly lower into the water, which I have learned is the aquatic equivalent of conceding a point without granting victory.
They constructed the rest.
She said, with a tightness that suggested this had been bothering her for a very long time.
Embellishment, invention, simplification, call it what you will. They saw a moment and mistook it for a method.
They saw a woman in a lake holding a sword and concluded you had personally mined the ore, smelted it, forged it, enchanted it, and then staged your own reveal like a theatrical production.
Yes.
They gave you an entire career you did not ask for.
Yes.
They removed the only useful part of the story.
To us immortal beings, yes.
I leaned back slightly, staring at the water as though it might apologize on behalf of literature. Well, this situation certainly sucks. She sank slightly lower in the water, which I took to mean agreement. She burbled like a croaking octopus.
Hephaestus did the forging. I gave him instructions on what I like. There is a difference. One of us understands tensile strength. The other understands what becomes of a king in a cold country when he cannot scratch the exact center of his back.
Which, I mused, with genuine reverence, makes you the only strategist in Camelot. She put her hand on her ghostly hip.
Obviously.
I leaned closer. Then tell me everything. This might come in handy for me later. The surface of the lake shimmered.
Okay, but don't tell Morgana, Oprah Winfrey, or CNN about it, alright? I'll never hear the end of it. There is a hidden release under the grip, quarter-turn mechanism. He balanced the blade so the scratching arm folded along the internal spine without affecting ceremonial handling.
I closed my eyes, imagining the peak divinity in a single scratch. Please hurry and just tell me what I should do. This itch is unbearable.
Cthulhu, just go to Hephaestus. He probably still has the old templates somewhere unless Olympus has filed them under masculine delusions again.
Wait, if you knew the sword was this useful, why did no one preserve the specifications? Her face appeared one last time, just above the water, wearing the expression of a woman who had spent 1,000 years watching men misunderstand objects.
Oh, would you trust the secret recipe to the Krabby Patty formula in your own keep if you were surrounded by planktons all the time? Use your brain, you insufferable space calamari.
Excuse me, what?
And only come again if you want to get your nails done. Until then, get thee gone.
Then she vanished. It was then that my long journey was decided, and in my desperation, and in what I maintain was a perfectly respectable attempt to reacquire a critical cultural object, I went to Olympus to speak with Hephaestus. I hate Olympus, by the way. Olympus is what happens when architecture mistakes vanity for climate. Every surface there appears to have been polished by an argument. The columns all look as if they expect to be admired for surviving their own symmetry. Light arrives from angles that suggest either theatrical conspiracy or divine insecurity. The place is less a realm than an estate agent's fever dream after too much nectar and intergenerational resentment. I found Hephaestus in the forge, naturally, because that is where beings with actual jobs tend to remain, while their relatives swan about draped in weather and poor decisions. He was bent over an anvil, hammering some terrible radiant thing into being with the patience of a man who has spent millennia turning other people's dramatic impulses into functioning objects. I need Excalibur recreated, I said a bit too enthusiastically.
No.
He shrugged. You will observe, listener, that this was an answer given before any pleading, argument, blackmail, or legal interpretation had begun. I find this insulting on principle. A refusal ought at least to respect the ceremony of escalation. How in the... You have not even heard my case!
I know the shape of a demand by the sound it makes when it walks, and yours is not unfamiliar.
My tone reflects suffering. And how are all three of you saying the same damn thing? Are you in the same group chat?
What?
My daughter and the sea witch said the same thing.
Great old one. Your tone reflects a plan I want no part of. And please speak kindly of the Lady of the Lake. She has earned her reputation. She also knows quite a few good manicurists.
At this point, I explained, with commendable restraint, that I did not need kingship, destiny, Britain, or any of the damp pageantry ordinarily associated with the sword. I required only the specifications, revealing my conversation with the Lady of the Lake and Vistaki. Hephaestus closed his eyes and groaned in a way that suggested two things at once. First, that he knew exactly what I meant, and second, that somewhere in his long life he had hoped this conversation would never occur.
How do you know about the back-scratching feature in the sword?
Because unlike most civilizations, I go to the sources behind the myth. He muttered something in ancient Greek so industrial it may have qualified as metallurgy. Then I pressed my advantage. And because, I continued, I also know the Lady of the Lake originally requested a hidden compartment for silverware, not just a backscratcher. And I know you made scores of more mythical swords with other glove compartments in them. Some for bullets, some for backscratchers, others for light novels in Japan, and still more for holding lunch. He stared at me like I'd just grown a new set of eyes, which is actually highly possible because I do possess several more eyes that appear when I'm annoyed or itching. I am very proud of this moment, however. So nay, Hephaestus, not merely silverware, I pressed on, warming to my task, but to travel silverware, compact, regal, fold out. She believed, and I quote, that no king should be caught unable to dine with grace if destiny ran long. And there was, if memory serves, a second auxiliary compartment proposed for a backscratcher, selected condiments, and had the age possessed the technology, a copy of Monty Python and the Holy Grail on DVD. The hammer stopped. In a better world, that would have ended it. In a sensible cosmos, the threat of publicizing that Excalibur was essentially a monarch's emergency picnic system would have compelled immediate cooperation. I made it abundantly clear that if Hephaestus refused me, I would go upstairs and inform every last peacock on Olympus that their most famous contribution to Western kingship had been designed as a luxury Swiss army myth. I would tell Zeus. I would tell Hera. I would tell Apollo, who would immediately try to write a song about it and somehow make it worse. I would tell Ares, who would laugh so hard he'd dislocate something important. I would tell Hermes, which is functionally the same as publishing. Hephaestus said no anyway. Creation gods, you see, are subject to some of the most offensively specific regulations in existence. They may create foundational object only at the beginning of a myth, the birth of a cult, the ignition of a religion, or the sort of national delusion that later becomes heritage tourism. You may patch, you may restore, you may repair, you may improve within tolerances. But to recreate Excalibur as Excalibur, with all its symbolic freight and original authority intact, would constitute first-order mythic creation. And that, he told me, cannot be done on a Monday. I would like it noted for the eternal record that whenever reality produces a sentence as stupid as "cannot be done on a Monday," one is not dealing with cosmic truth, but with committee residue. Somewhere, some era, some conclave of radiant idiots made one mistake too many and fossilized their embarrassment into law. Why Monday?
It destabilizes inheritance pathways.
That is not an explanation. That is a phrase assembled to avoid one.
It is the law of laws.
Laws are what frightened beings build around old mistakes. He considered this, then said,
Yes, and yet Sisyphus must do what he is commanded, and Atlas must do as he is instructed day after day.
But then he made the matter worse by admitting that Excalibur itself had technically been forged at 11:59 at night on a Monday. I let that sit between us like a bomb. He attempted, with the doomed confidence of a man defending paperwork, to claim this had been a liminal forge minute, an overflow period, narrative spillover, Monday in conclusion but not in essence. I informed him, with all the tenderness of a guillotine, that 11:59 is Monday wearing a crown, and nothing more. He replied that the presence of a prophecy, a lake divinity, 3 active anxieties, and an emerging British identity cluster had qualified the event as an ignition window. This is the sort of sentence Olympus produces when it wants history to sound unavoidable rather than ridiculous. I would like to say that I left Olympus in a dignified manner. This would be incorrect. At some point between cannot be done on a Monday and liminal forge minute, I sat down on the steps like a man who had been professionally defeated by a calendar. Hephaestus continued working behind me, the steady rhythm of hammer against metal carrying on with the calm indifference of a universe that had already moved on from my suffering. The itch did not move on. It intensified. It expanded, in fact, with the unearned confidence of something that had discovered it was winning. I attempted briefly to ignore it. This lasted the length of one breath and the moral collapse of two. Then I did what all great beings eventually do when stripped of dignity, myth, and options. I laid on the ground in front of Hephaestus. Hephaestus turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge that reality had shifted into a less irritating configuration.
What are you doing?
I looked at him. Then I looked at the forge. Then, with the full weight of my ancient and terrible existence pressing down upon a single humiliating truth. Hey man, could you scratch it? There are silences, and then there are silences that arrive with context. This was the second kind. We both stared at each other god to god with the slow dawning recognition of a father, realizing his child has just bypassed every available tool in the room to ask for assistance with something entirely within reach of common sense.
You crossed pantheons,
He gathered.
harassed a lake spirit, attempted to extort Olympus, and constructed a thesis on symbolic seating.
I was in pain.
Because your back itches.
Yes. He considered this. Behind him, the forge crackled softly, as though also waiting to see how this would resolve. Then he sighed, set the hammer down, and stepped away from the anvil with the reluctant resignation of a man who's accepted that history will not record this correctly.
Stand up before someone notices.
He commanded. I did. There are few positions more vulnerable than turning your back on a god of metallurgy and hoping for the best.
You're certain
He continued, stepping behind me.
that this is what you want your solution to be.
I am certain of nothing except the location of the itch.
Fair.
There was a pause. Then, a single precise motion. A scratch. Reader, I will not describe what followed in poetic terms, because that would cheapen the experience. I will say only this. Civilizations have risen for less. I exhaled. Yes, I said, to the forge, to Olympus. To the long and complicated history of objects designed by people who refused to admit the body existed. Yes, all is right in the multiverse again. Behind me, Hephaestus wiped his hands on a cloth and returned to his work without ceremony.
By the way,
He said, not looking up, as though mentioning a missing hammer rather than a foundational artifact of Western myth.
Excalibur doesn't exist anymore. The Necronomicon ate it. So now I can't make it because, as I've explained, cosmic law says creation only happens at the start of a religion, myth, never on a Monday. And now the original is gone.
I turned, slowly, because there are only so many indignities one can process at full speed. How, I asked, with what I consider admirable restraint, am I supposed to scratch my back then? He did not answer, and I keep telling it not to grow a mouth. I continued, because clarity is important in these matters. No reasonable book would try. Hephaestus gave a small, tired exhale, the kind that suggests he has just been handed a problem he will absolutely not be solving.
I think we're done here.
Then, as an afterthought,
Tell Vistarchi my regards.
that, I note, was directed to her and not to me, which I found both accurate and offensive. I took a step back, then another, reassembling myself into something that could leave a forge without incident. Thanks for the assist. There was a pause. See you later, buddy. Hephaestus looked at me with a recalibrating stare, as though adjusting his understanding of what exactly had just occurred in his workspace. Then he turned back to the forge, and I left Olympus hopefully for the last time.